If you heard growling and whimpering echoing from a frozen cliffside, would you keep walking? Every morning for the past 3 years, Thomas Granger had walked the same path along the edge of Elk Ridge, a craggy trail overlooking Montana's Bitterroot Valley. The routine was all he had left since his wife passed away, leaving behind a hollow house and a silence that never broke. He wore the same coat she'd patched up, carried the same thermos she gave him for Christmas 12 years ago, and greeted the same wind that reminded him he was still breathing. But this morning, something felt off, a sound, faint, then sharp. Not human, but pleading. Animal. He stopped. The sky was still dark blue, the trail frosted over, and down below, just beyond a ledge, came a sound that didn't belong in the winter stillness. He crouched slowly, gripping a branch for balance, and leaned toward the edge. There, tangled in the jagged underbrush about 20 feet down, was a shape. Fur. Gray, trembling, slick with ice and blood. At first, he thought it might be a coyote or dog. But as his eyes adjusted and the creature raised its head, revealing its massive frame and golden eyes, Thomas felt his breath catch. A wolf. Not just any wolf, a young adult, caught in barbed wire, panting, injured, and alone. His first instinct was to back away. Wolves didn't cry. They weren't supposed to look broken, and yet here it was, ribs visible, one paw twisted at an unnatural angle, its flank rising and falling in shudders. Thomas stood frozen. He'd grown up on stories that taught him to fear wolves. He remembered tales of missing livestock and cold stares from the edge of the trees, but this didn't look like a predator. This looked like something hanging on by a thread, something no one was coming for. The cold cut through his gloves. Still, he didn't move. The wolf made eye contact, not a glare, not aggression. Something else, pain, yes, but also pleading. Thomas felt his pulse in his ears. Why would he care? Why now? Why this animal? But something had shifted. He wasn't just staring at a wolf. He was looking at a mirror. Something wild, wounded, and left to die alone in the cold. He fumbled for his phone. No signal, of course. The trail was too remote. No one came out here anymore, not in winter. He looked back toward the trailhead, 40 minutes uphill. And the sun would set into hours. He could leave, go back to his truck, report it later. Someone else would come, a ranger. Animal control, maybe, but would the wolf still be alive? Would anyone else care? His fingers clenched the railing harder. He tried calling out gently, stupidly, hey, easy now. The wolf flinched but didn't snarl. Blood stained the snow beneath it like spilled ink. Thomas winced. That barbed wire wasn't just tangled, it was buried in flesh. The wolf's back leg looked mangled, the metal glinting cruelly. Whoever had set that trap hadn't intended to check it soon. Thomas didn't hunt, but he knew cruelty when he saw it. Suddenly, the wolf let out a long, low-howled hoarse, heartbreaking. Not loud, just lost. Thomas's throat tightened. It wasn't a cry for help. It was resignation. A call into emptiness, as if to say, I know no one is coming. And in that moment, Thomas remembered the silence in his house, the unopened boxes of his wife's letters, and how he hadn't spoken to another soul in almost a week. His breath formed clouds in the air, his knees trembled. Still, he began scanning the path, looking for a way down. There was a narrow ledge to the right, slick with snow, barely wide enough for 1 foot. Insane, but doable. Maybe. His boots were old. His balance wasn't what it used to be. One wrong move and it wouldn't be a rescue, it'd be a body recovery. And still, he stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. The wolf never took its eyes off him, head resting on the ice. As Thomas started down the slope, every crunch of snow felt louder than thunder. He gripped tree roots, dug his heels in, whispered under his breath. And then, just as he reached the halfway point, the branch he was holding snapped. His body lurched sideways. The wolf lifted its head sharply. Thomas slammed into the snow and slid. Fast. He crashed against a rock, wind knocked out of him. Snow filled his collar, but he was close now, maybe 10 feet from the wolf. It hadn't moved, watching him with those strange, golden eyes. Eyes that didn't ask why, only what now. Thomas groaned, pushed himself up on one arm, and realized something terrifying. He was bleeding to the gash on his thigh from the fall. The cold was setting in fast, and no one knew he was here. Thomas blinked against the snowflakes now starting to fall, trying to stay upright. He knew hypothermia didn't just creep, it stole, quietly, and the clock was ticking. The Wolf lay motionless, its breathing shallow, its eyes locked on his. Between them, the distance had closed, but the gap of trust hadn't. Still, Thomas inched forward, whispering to the animal as if to a frightened child. "Easy, Dot. I'm not here to hurt you." His voice cracked. Maybe he was saying it to himself, too. Kneeling now, he got his first real look at the wound. The barbed wire had dug deep, slicing through fur and skin, now frozen into place by layers of blood and ice. It wrapped around the hind leg and part of the torso, each movement a fresh agony for the creature. Thomas swallowed hard. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small folding knife he always carried. Its blade looked impossibly small against the problem ahead, but it was all he had. He moved slowly, keeping his body low, non-threatening. The Wolf didn't growl, just trembled. When Thomas finally laid a hand on the animal's side, he expected resistance. A snap, a lunge, anything, but there was none. Only silence, acceptance, maybe even relief. With shaking hands, he began to cut the first strand, working carefully to avoid the raw flesh. His fingers were numb, his breath shallow. And still, he cut. Each slice was torture. Not for the Wolf, for him. The closer he worked, the more he saw. Bruises, dried blood, old scars. This Wolf had been through hell. Likely caught for days, maybe even a week, surviving only by sheer will. Thomas could smell infection now. The leg was badly damaged, maybe beyond saving, but that wasn't the point. Right now, survival was the point, for both of them. He paused, blinking snow from his lash. The sky had turned steel gray. He looked at the ridge above. No sign of life, no footsteps, no one coming. His jaw clenched. This wasn't just about the Wolf anymore. It was about a man who had run from his own pain for too long, who had watched the world shrink after grief, who had stopped believing in connection. And now, here was this broken animal, forcing him to act. A sound echoed behind him, something snapping, a tree limb, or worse, another predator. He turned quickly, eyes scanning the trees. Nothing, just wind. But it reminded him, they were still vulnerable. Wolves, he remembered, didn't always travel alone. And humans were still prey, if the conditions were right. But something told him this one was alone, abandoned, like him. He pressed on, freeing more of the wire. At one point, the Wolf let out a pained grunt and shifted. Thomas froze, but the animal didn't lash out. It just stared at him, breathing harder now. Closer, more present. The fear wasn't gone, but something else had taken its place. Curiosity, maybe, hope. He whispered again, "Hang on, buddy. I'm almost there." He didn't know why he called him that, buddy, but it felt right. With the last strand of wire finally loosened, the Wolf jerked its leg back instinctively, yelping in pain. It tried to rise, collapsed, and then slowly, shakily, stood on 3 legs. Blood oozed down its side. It wobbled. Thomas didn't move, afraid to spook it. The Wolf's breathing was ragged, its body swaying. They stared at each other, alone in the white silence, 2 souls on the edge of everything. Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out his last piece of jerky, something he packed out of habit. He offered it slowly, hand extended. The Wolf didn't take it, but it didn't flee either. It looked at him, then the food, then back at him. For a moment, time paused. And then, as if acknowledging something unspoken, the Wolf took one limping step toward him. Just one. That was the moment Thomas knew. He couldn't leave him here. Not like this. Not after all this. The pain in his leg throbbed, and the cold bit deep, but the decision was already made. He unzipped his coat, the wind stabbing into his chest, and moved to gently cover the Wolf's back with it. He couldn't carry him far, but he could try. He had to try. He couldn't walk away anymore. Thomas fashioned a makeshift sling from his coat and scarf, wrapping it under the Wolf's belly to take some of the pressure off its mangled leg. Every motion was agonizing for the Wolf, for him, but there was no turning back. The trail uphill was treacherous and nearly vertical in some spots, but Thomas had no choice. He hoisted the Wolf slowly, inch by inch, until it rested against his chest. The animal let out a weak growl, more a protest than a threat. Thomas grunted, "I hate this too." Step by step, they began their ascent. The snow had picked up, and visibility dropped fast. Thomas leaned heavily on branches and stones, his injured leg protesting every move. The valve shifted occasionally, trying to help by not resisting. It was surreal, an apex predator willingly letting a broken man carry it out of the wild. Each pose felt like it might be the last, each breath harder than the one before. But with every step, Thomas could feel something else rising. A flicker of purpose. Near the halfway point, he slipped again. The valve fell from his grasp with a thud and yelped. Thomas panicked, crawling to him through the snow. "I'm sorry, buddy." The valve didn't bite, didn't flee. Just laid there, panting, blinking up at him. He was too tired to fight, and so was Thomas. But as he lifted him once more, something else happened. The valve licked his glove. Once. Quick. Grateful. An hour later, just before dusk, Thomas stumbled onto the trailhead parking lot. His truck sat buried in frost. No one else in sight. He opened the back, laid the valve onto a blanket, and started the engine with fingers so cold they barely worked. Heat poured out of the vents like a second chance. He didn't even hesitate. He turned toward town, toward help. This valve needed more than warmth now. He needed. At the vet clinic 20 minutes later, Thomas burst in, carrying the limp animal in his arms. The receptionist gasped. "Is that a... He's hurt bad?" Thomas interrupted. "Trapped, bleeding. Please, don't call anyone yet. Just help him." The vet on duty, Dr. Rains, stepped out from the back. She had sharp eyes and steady hands. "Lay him down. We'll take it from here." Thomas watched as they wheeled the valve into the back, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. The hours crawled. He sat in the waiting room, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, a mug of coffee going cold in his hands. When Dr. Rains finally returned, her expression was unreadable. "He'll live," she said finally. "We stitched the leg, started antibiotics." "It was close. You saved him." Thomas swallowed hard. Is he going to hate me?" She smiled softly. "He doesn't hate you. He trusts you. That's rare, you know." Word spread. A man carrying a half-dead valve into town. People talked. Some were concerned. Others were curious. His daughter called for the first time in months after hearing the story on local radio. "Dad," she said quietly, "what were you thinking?" "I wasn't," he replied. "I just couldn't let him die alone." She didn't answer right away. But then she whispered, "Mom would have done the same." The valve whom the vet staff had started calling Ghost was kept in recovery for several days. Despite everyone's warnings, Thomas came back every day, sat beside his cage, talked to him, read him letters his wife had written years ago. He hadn't read them aloud until now. Ghost listened, eyes steady, breathing calm. Two broken hearts learning how to beat again in each other's company. On the 6th day, something remarkable happened. Thomas reached his hand slowly into the cage, offering no food, no bribe, just presence. Ghost moved forward, stiff but willing, and placed his head in Thomas's palm. The room fell silent. A tech nearby whispered, "He's claiming you." Dr. Rains nodded. "He doesn't want to go back to the wild. He's chosen." Thomas looked down at the golden eyes watching him. And for the first time in years, he felt chosen too. When the time came for Ghost to be discharged, there were questions. Legal ones, practical ones. You can't keep a wild wolf, some said. But others, activists, biologists, the community stepped up. They raised funds, made calls. A sanctuary in the valley offered a compromise. Ghost could stay on Thomas's land under strict supervision. A team would help with his care. Papers were filed. Exceptions granted. Hearts swayed. And so, the valve didn't return to the forest. And Thomas didn't return to solitude. They returned together home. Different now, still healing, but no longer alone. The man who'd once walked frozen cliffs with nothing but grief at his side now had a living shadow, limping beside him, eyes always alert. A survivor, a friend, a soul that knew what it meant to be rescued not just in body, but in spirit. Morning light crept through the blinds of Thomas's cabin as it always had, but now it warmed more than wood and old photographs. Ghost lay curled at the foot of the fireplace, his once wounded leg still stiff but stronger with each day. Thomas poured 2 mugs of tea, out of habit, setting one down beside the worn armchair where his wife used to sit. He didn't talk to the empty space anymore, not since Ghost came. Now, When he spoke, someone listened with ears that twitched and eyes that never judged. The land around them had changed too. What once felt like a graveyard of memories now pulsed with quiet life. A rehab shed had been built out back, donated by local volunteers. Kids from the nearby school visited with their parents to hear Thomas talk about Ghost's story. They didn't see an old man talking to a wolf. They saw something brave, something good, something they couldn't look away from. Thomas, once invisible in his own town, had become part of something again. Mornings turned into ritual. Thomas and Ghost walked the ridge trail together, the same trail where they'd first found each other. Ghost still limped but held his head high, ears perked. He didn't lead or follow, he walked beside. And when they reached the ledge where the trap had once been, Thomas always stopped, not out of fear, but reverence. He'd kneel, touch the ground, and whisper, "We leave that pain here." Every time, Ghost responded in his own way, nose to the wind, a short, sharp howl that cut through the valley like a prayer. The first time he did it, Thomas cried. Not from sorrow, but from release. Grief didn't vanish, it never does. But it made space for something else. And that space, once filled with silence, was now a home for healing. The sanctuary team visited weekly. They brought medical supplies, food, and updates on policies they were helping push through because of Ghost's case. "You changed how we think about rescue," one volunteer told Thomas. "Not just for wolves, for people too." He'd nod, uncomfortable with praise, but inside, something lit up. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was part of the rescue. His daughter visited in spring, bringing her own kids for the first time. At first, they were nervous. But Ghost, calm and regal, lay on the porch and watched them play, never moving unless they got too close to the woods. A quiet guardian. That night, his daughter placed a hand on Thomas's and said, "You're not the same man I called last winter." He smiled. Neither is he. On the anniversary of the rescue, a local journalist ran a story titled "The Man and the Wolf Who Saved Each Other." It went viral. Messages poured in from all over the country, people who had lost loved ones, veterans battling trauma, widows living in silence. They thanked him, not for the wolf, for proving that pain doesn't have to be permanent. That healing is possible when someone, even an animal, dares to reach across the divide. Ghost became more than a companion, he became a symbol. His story was used in school programs about empathy and conservation. Local lawmakers cited him during debates on banning cruel traps. A documentary crew even came to film their bond. But Thomas never cared about the attention. What mattered was what happened in the quiet moments when Ghost laid his head in Thomas's lap on stormy nights, when he barked at nothing and Thomas knew it was a memory passing through. Years passed, seasons turned, the limp remained. So did the scars on both of them. But neither hid anymore. They showed each other fully. Raw, real, and without shame. And when Thomas sat under the stars at night, with Ghost pressed against his leg, he no longer asked why his wife had been taken or what he was meant to do with the time left. He already knew. In the end, he didn't just save a wolf. He found purpose, he found grace, he found the will to live again. And in doing so, he gave Ghost something no wild pack could have ever offered. A home where love wasn't earned, it was given, freely, completely. He didn't just save a wolf, he found himself.